Page 199. 5. Jean Valjean found himself in a sort of garden, very large and of a singular appearance, one of those gloomy gardens which made to be seen in the winter and at night. This garden was oblong and with a row of large poplars at the further end, some tall forest trees in the corners, and a clear space in the center, where stood a very large isolated tree. Then a few fruit trees contorted and shaggy like big bushes, some vegetable beds, a melon patch, the glass covers of which shone in the moonlight, and an old well. There were here and there stone benches which seemed black with moss. The walks were bordered with sorry little shrubs, perfectly straight. The grass covered half of them, and the green moss covered the rest. Nothing can be imagined more wild and more solitary than this garden. There was no one there, and that was very natural on account of the hour, but it did not seem as if the place were made for anybody to walk in, even in the broad noon. Jean Valjean's first care had been to find his shoes and put them on. Then he entered the shed with Cosette. A man trying to escape never thinks himself sufficiently concealed. The child, thinking constantly of the Thénardiers, shared his instinct and cowered down as closely as she could. Cosette trembled and pressed closely to his side. They heard the tumultuous clamor from the patrol ransacking the cul-de-sac and the street, the clatter of their muskets against the stones, the calls of Javert and the watchman he had stationed, and his imprecations mingled with words which they could not distinguish. At the end of a quarter of an hour it seemed as though the stormy rumbling began to recede. Jean Valjean did not breathe. He had placed his hand gently upon Cosette's mouth, but the solitude about him was so strangely calm that the frightful din, so furious and so near, it did not even cast over a shadow of disturbance. It seemed as if these walls were built of this deaf stone spoken of in the Scriptures. Suddenly, in the midst of this deep calm, a new sound arose, a celestial, divine, ineffable sound, as if ravishing as the other was as horrible. It was a hymn which came forth from the darkness, a bewildering mingling of prayer and harmony in the obscure and fearful silence of the night. Voices of women, but voices of the pure accents of virgins, and artless accents of children. Those voices which are not of earth, and which resemble those that the newborn still hear, and the dying hear already. This song came from a gloomy building which overlooked the garden. At the moment which the uproar of the demons receded, one would have said it was a choir of angels approaching in the darkness. Cosette and Jean Valjean fell on their knees. They knew not what it was. They knew not where they were, but they both felt that the man and the child, the penitent and the innocent, that they ought to be on their knees. These voices had this strange effect. They did not prevent the building from appearing deserted. It was like a supernatural song in the uninhabited dwelling. While these voices were singing, Jean Valjean was entirely absorbed in them. He no longer saw the night. He saw a blue sky. It seemed to fill the spreading of those wings which we all have within us. The chant ceased. Perhaps it had lasted a long time. Jean Valjean could not have told. Hours of ecstasy are never more than a moment. All had again relapsed into silence. There was nothing more in the street, nothing more in the garden. That which threatened, that which reassured, all had vanished. The wind rattled the dry grass on the top of the wall, which made a low, soft, and mournful noise. Page 201. 6. The child had laid her head upon a stone and gone to sleep. He sat down near her and looked at her. Little by little as he beheld her, he grew calm, and regained possession of his clearness of mind. He plainly perceived this truth, the basis of his life henceforth, that so long as she should be alive, so long as he should have her with him, he should need nothing except for her, and fear nothing save on her account. He did not even realize that he was so very cold, having taken off his coat to cover her. Meanwhile, through the reverie into which he had fallen, he had heard for some time a singular noise. It sounded like a little bell that someone was shaking. This noise was in the garden. It was heard distinctly, though feebly. It resembled a dimly heard tinkling of cowbells in the pastures at night. This noise made Jean Valjean turn. He looked, and saw there was someone in the garden, something which resembled a man, walking among the glass cases of the melon patch, rising up, stooping down, stopping with a regular motion, as if he were drawing or stretching something upon the ground. This being appeared to be limp. Jean Valjean shuddered. He said to himself that perhaps Javert and his spies had not gone away, that they had doubtless left somebody on watch in the street, that if this man should discover him in the garden, he would cry thief, and would deliver him up. He took the sleeping Cosette gently in his arms, and carried her into the furthest corner of the shed, behind a heap of old furniture that was out of use. Cosette did not stir. From there he watched the strange motions of this man in the melon patch. It seemed very singular, but on the sound of the bell followed every movement of the man. When the man approached, the sound approached. When he moved away, the sound moved away. If he made some sudden motion, a trill accompanied the motion. When he stopped, the noise ceased. It seemed evident that the bell was fastened to this man, but then what could that mean? What was this man to whom the bell was hung as to rain or a cow? While he was revolving these questions, he touched Cosette's hand. They were icy. "Oh, God," said he. He called to her in a low voice, "Cosette." She did not open her eyes. He shook her smartly. She did not wake. "Could she be dead?" said he, and he sprang up, shuddering from head to foot. Cosette was pallid. She had fallen prostrate on the ground at his feet, making no sign. He listened for her breathing. She was breathing, but with a respiration that appeared feeble and about to stop. How should he get her warm again? How rouse her? All else was banished from his thoughts. He rushed desperately out of the ruin. It was absolutely necessary that in less than a quarter of an hour Cosette should be in bed and before a fire. Page 202. 7. He walked straight to the man whom he saw in the gardens. He had taken in his hand the roll of money which was in his vest pocket. The man had his head down and did not see him coming. With a few strides, Jean Valjean was at his side. Jean Valjean approached him, exclaiming, 100 francs. The man started and raised his eyes. 100 francs for you, continued Jean Valjean, if you will give me refuge tonight. The moon shone full in Jean Valjean's bewildered face. What? Is it you, Father Madeleine? Said the man. This name, thus pronounced at this dark hour in this unknown place by this unknown man, made Jean Valjean start back. He was ready for anything but that. The speaker was an old man, bent and lame, dressed much like a peasant who had on his left knee a leather kneecap from which hung a bell. His face was in the shade, and he could not be distinguished. Meanwhile, the good man had taken off his cap and was exclaiming tremulously, "Ah, my God, how did you come here? Father Madeleine, how did you get in? Oh, Lord, did you fall from the sky? Who are you, and what is this house?" asked Jean Valjean. "Oh, indeed, that is good now," exclaimed the man. "I am the one you got the place for here, and this house is the one you got me in the place in. What? You don't remember me?" "No," said Jean Valjean. "And how does it happen that you know me?" "You saved my life," said the man. He turned. A ray of the moon lighted upon his face, and Jean Valjean recognized old Fauchelevent. "Ah," said Jean Valjean, "it is you. Yes, I remember you." "That is very fortunate," said the old man in a reproachful tone. "And what are you doing here?" added Jean Valjean. "Oh, I am covering my melons." Old Fauchelevent had in his hand indeed at that moment, when Jean Valjean accosted him, the end of a piece of awning which he was stretching out over the melon patch. He had already spread out several in this way during the hour he had been in the gardens. It was this work which made him go through the peculiar motions observed by Jean Valjean from the shed. He continued, "I said to myself, the moon is bright, and there's going to be a frost. Suppose I put their jackets on my melons, and," added he, looking at Jean Valjean with a loud laugh, "you would have done well to do much for yourself." "But how did you come here?" Jean Valjean, finding that he was known by this man, at least under his name of Madeleine, went no further with his precautions. He multiplied questions. Oddly enough, their parts seemed reversed. It was he, the intruder, who put questions. "And what is this bell you have on your knee?" "That," answered Fauchelevent, "that is so they may keep away from me." "Keep away from you?" Old Fauchelevent winked in an indescribable manner. "Ah, bless me, there's nothing but women in this house, plenty of young girls. It seems that I am dangerous to meet. The bell warns them when I come, they go away." "What is this house?" "Why, you know very well." "No, I don't." "Why, you got me this place here as a gardener." "Answer me as if I didn't know." "Well, it is the convent of the Petit Picpus." Then Jean Valjean remembered chance, that is to say, Providence, had thrown him precisely into this convent of the Saint Antoine, to which old Fauchelevent, crippled by his fall from his cart, had been admitted upon his recommendations 2 years before. He repeated as if he were talking to himself, "The convent of the Petit Picpus." "But now, really," resumed Fauchelevent, "how the deuce did you get in here, Father Madeleine? It is no use for you to be a saint. You are a man, and no men come in here. But you are here. There is none but me." "But," resumed Jean Valjean, "I must stay here." "Oh, my God!" exclaimed Fauchelevent. Jean Valjean reproached the man and said to him in a grave voice, "Father Fauchelevent, I saved your life." "I was first to remember it," answered Fauchelevent. "Well, you can do now for me what I once did for you." Fauchelevent grasped in his old, wrinkled, and trembling hands the robust hand of Jean Valjean, and it was some seconds before he could speak. At last he exclaimed, "Oh, that would be a blessing of God, if I could do something for you in return for that. I save your life. Monsieur Maire, the old man is at your disposal." A wonderful joy had, as it were, transfigured the old gardener. A radiance seemed to shine forth from his face. "What do you want me to do?" he added. "I will explain. You have a room? I have a solitary shanty over there behind the ruins of the old convent, in a corner that nobody ever sees. There are 3 rooms." The shanty was in fact so well concealed behind the ruins, and so well arranged that no one should see it, that Jean Valjean had not seen it. "Good," said Jean Valjean. "Now may I ask you of you 2 things?" "What are they, Monsieur Madeleine?" "First, that you will not tell anybody what you know about me. Second, that you will not attempt to learn anything more." "As you please. I know that you can do nothing dishonorable, that you have always been a man of God. And then, besides, it was you that put me here. It is your place that I am yours." "Very well. But now come with me. We will go for the child." "Ah?" said Fauchelevent. "There is a child?" He said not a word more, but followed Jean Valjean as a dog follows his master. In half an hour Cosette again became rosy before a good fire, was asleep in the old gardener's bed. Jean Valjean had put on his cravat and coat. His hat, which he had thrown over the wall, had been found and brought in. While Jean Valjean was putting on his coat, Fauchelevent had taken off his kneecap with the bell attached, which now hanging on a nail near a shutter decorated the wall. The 2 men were warming themselves, with their elbows on a table on which Fauchelevent had set a piece of cheese, some brown bread, a bottle of wine, and 2 glasses. And the old man said to Jean Valjean, putting his hand on his knee, "Ah, Father Madeleine, you didn't know me at first. You save people's lives, and then you forget them? Ah, that's bad. They remember you. You are ungrateful." Page 206. The Convent. 1. Before closing his eyes, Jean Valjean had said, "Henceforth I must remain here." These words were chasing one another through Fauchelevent's head the whole night. To tell the truth, neither of them had slept. Jean Valjean, feeling that he was discovered, and Javert was upon his track, knew full well that he and Cosette were lost should they return to the city. Since the new blast which had burst open upon him had thrown him into this cloister, Jean Valjean had but one thought, to remain there. Now for one in his unfortunate position, this convent was at once the safest and most dangerous place. The most dangerous for no man being allowed to enter. If he should be discovered, it was a flagrant crime, and Jean Valjean would take but one step from the convent to prison. The safest, for if he succeeded in getting permission to remain, who would come there to look for him? To live in an impossible place, that would be safety. For his part, Fauchelevent was racking his brains. He began by deciding that he was utterly bewildered. How did Monsieur Madeleine come there with such walls? The walls of a cloister are not so easily crossed. How did he happen to be with a child? A man does not scale a steep wall with a child in his arms. Who was this child? Where did they both come from? Since Fauchelevent had been in the convent, he had not heard a word from M. Sur M., and he knew nothing of what had taken place. From the words that escaped Jean Valjean, however, the gardener thought he might conclude that Monsieur Madeleine had probably failed on account of the hard times, and that he was pursued by his creditors, or it might be that he was compromised with some political affair that he was concealing himself. Being in concealment, Monsieur Madeleine had taken the convent for an asylum, and it was natural that he should wish to remain there. Fauchelevent was groping amid conjectures But he saw nothing clearly except this: Monsieur Madeleine has saved my life. This single certainty was sufficient, and determined him. He said aside to himself, "It is my turn now." He added in his conscience, Monsieur Madeleine did not deliberate so long when the question was about squeezing himself under the wagon to draw me out. He decided that he would save Monsieur Madeleine. But to have him remain in the convent, what a problem was that! Before that almost chimerical attempt, Fauchelevent did not recoil. This poor Picardy peasant, with no other ladder than his devotion, his goodwill, a little of that old country cunning, engaged for once in the service of a generous intuition, undertook to scale the impossibilities of the cloister and the craggy escarpments of the rules of Saint Benedict. Fauchelevent was an old man who had been selfish throughout his life, and who near the end of his days, crippled, infirm, having no interest longer in the world, found it sweet to be grateful, and seeing a virtuous action to be done, threw himself into it, like a man who at the moment of death, finding a hard glass of some good wine, which he had never tasted, should drink it greedily. We might add that the air which he had been breathing now for several years in this convent had destroyed his personality, and had at last rendered some good action necessary to him. He formed his resolution then to devote himself to Monsieur Madeleine. Page 208. 2. Father Fauchelevent rapped softly at a door, and a gentle voice answered, "Come in." This door was that of the parlour allotted to the gardener, for use when it was necessary to communicate with him. This parlour was near the hall of the chapter. The prioress, seated in the only chair in the parlour, was waiting for Fauchelevent. The gardener made a timid bow, and stopped at the threshold of the cell. The prioress, who was saying her rosary, raised her eyes and said, "Ah, it is you, Father Fauvent." This abbreviation had been adopted in the convent. Fauchelevent again began his bow. "Father Fauvent, I have called you." "I am here, Reverend Mother. I wish to speak to you." "And I, for my part," said Fauchelevent, with a boldness at which he was alarmed himself, "I have something to say to the most Reverend Mother." The prioress looked at him. "Ah, you have a communication to make to me?" "A petition." "Well, what is it?" Good man Fauchelevent, ex-notary, belonged to that class of peasants who are never disconcerted. A certain combination of ignorance and skill is very effective. You do not suspect it, and you accede to it. Within little more than 2 years he had lived in the convent. Fauchelevent had achieved a success in the community. In this enigmatic and taciturn cloister, nothing was hidden from him. His sphinx blabbed all her secrets in his ear. Fauchelevent knew everything, concealed everything. That was his art, which the whole convent thought him stupid, a great merit in religion. The mothers prized Fauchelevent. He was a rare mute. He inspired confidence. The congregation thought much of him, old, lame, seeing nothing, probably a little deaf. How many good qualities! It would have been difficult to replace him. The good man, with the assurance of one who feels that he is appreciated, began before the reverend prioress a rustic harangue, quiet, diffuse, and very profound. He spoke at length of his age, his infirmities, of the weight of years henceforth doubly heavily upon him, of the growing demands of his work, of the size of the garden, of the nights to be spent, like last night, for example, when he had put up awnings over the melons on account of the moon, and finally ended with this, that he had a brother. The prioress gave a start. A brother, not young, second start of the prioress, but a reassured start, that if it was desired, this brother could come and live with him and help him, that he was an excellent gardener, that the community would get good services from him, better than his own, that otherwise, if his brother were not admitted, as he, the oldest, felt he was broken down and unequal to the labor, he would be obliged to leave, though with much regret, and that his brother had a little girl that he would bring with him, who would be reared under God in the house, and who, perhaps, who knows, would some day become a nun. When he had finished, the prioress stopped the sliding of her rosary through her fingers, and said, "Can you, between now and night, procure a strong iron bar?" "For what work?" "To be used as a lever." "Yes, Reverend Mother," answered Fauchelevent. The prioress, without adding a word, arose and went into the next room, which was the hall of the chapter, where the vocal mothers were probably assembled. Fauchelevent remained alone. Page 210. 3. About a quarter of an hour elapsed. The prioress returned and resumed her seat. Both seemed preoccupied. We report as well as we can the dialogue that followed. Father Favant, Reverend Mother, you are familiar with the chapel. I have a little box there to go to Mass in the offices. And you have been in the choir about your work? 2 or 3 times. A stone is to be erased. Heavy? The slab of the pavement at the side of the altar. The stone that covers the vault? Yes. That is a piece of work, where it would be well to have 2 men. The stone is arranged to turn on a pivot. Very well, Reverend Mother, I will open the vault, and the 4 mother choristers will help you. And when the vault is opened, it must be shut again. Is that all? No. Give me your orders, most Reverend Mother. Something must be let down. There was silence. The prioress, after a quivering of the underlip which resembled hesitation, spoke. Father Favant, Reverend Mother, you know that a mother died this morning. No? Father Favant, we must do what the dead wish. To be buried in the vault under the altar of the chapel. Not to go into profane ground, to remain in death where she prayed in life. This was the last request of Mother Crucifixion. She has asked it, that is to say, commanded it, but it is forbidden. Forbidden by men, enjoined by God. If it should come to be known, we have confidence in you. Reverend Mother, if the agent of the Health Commission, Saint Benedict II, in the matter of burial, resisted Constantine Pogantus. However, the commissary of police, Commanderie of the 7 German kings who entered Gaul in the reign of Constantius, expressly recognized the right of the conventuals to be inhumed in religion, that is to say, under the altar. But the inspector of the prefecture, the world is nothing before the cross, Martin XI, general of the Carthusians, gave his order to this device: Stacrox dum volitar obi. Amen, said Fauchelevent, imperturbable, in this method of extricating himself whenever he heard any Latin. Can we count upon you? I shall obey. It is well. Reverend Mother, I shall need a lever at least 6 feet long. Where will you get it? There are gratings, there are always iron bars. I have my heap of old iron at the back of the garden. Father Favant, be at the high altar with the iron bar at 11 o'clock. The office commences at midnight. It must be all finished a good quarter of an hour before. I will do everything to prove my zeal for the community. Reverend Mother, is this all? No. What more is there, then? There is still the empty coffin. This brought them to a stand. Fauchelevent pondered. The prioress pondered. Father Favant, what shall be done with the coffin? It will be put in the ground. Empty? Reverend Mother, I will put some earth into the coffin. That will have the effect of a body. You are right. Earth is of the same thing as man. So you will prepare this empty coffin. I will attend to that. The face of the prioress, till then dark and anxious, became again serene. She made him the sign of a superior dismissing an inferior. Fauchelevent moved toward the door. As he was going out, the prioress gently raised her voice. Father Favant, I am satisfied with you. Tomorrow, after the burial, bring your brother to me, and tell him to bring his daughter. Page 213. 4. The same evening Jean Valjean, thanks to a small door which is seen from the street, and which opens onto the garden, went out with Cosette while Fauchelevent distracted the attention of the doorman. Then he went back, and almost immediately, and was officially shown into the parlor by the doorman, who did not notice anything. The prioress, rosary in hand, was awaiting them. A mother with her veil down stood near her. A modest taper lighted, or one might almost say pretended to light up the parlor. The prioress scrutinized Jean Valjean. Nothing scanned so carefully as a downcast eye. She looked at Cosette attentively, and then said aside to the mother, "She will be homely." The 2 mothers talked together very low for a few minutes in a corner of the parlor, and the prioress turned and said, Father Favant, you will have another kneecap and a bell. We need 2 now. So next morning 2 little bells were heard tinkling in the garden, and the nuns could not keep from lifting a corner of their veils. They saw 2 men digging side by side in the lower part of the garden under the trees. Favant and another. Immense event. The silence was broken so far as to say, "It's an assistant gardener." The mothers added, "He is Father Favant's brother." In fact, Jean Valjean was regularly installed. He had the leather kneecap and bell. Henceforth he had his commission. His name was Ultimus Fauchelevent. The most powerful determining cause of his admission had been the remark of the prioress, "She will be homely." The prioress, having uttered this prediction, immediately took Cosette into her friendship and gave her a place in the school, building as a charity pupil. Page 214. 5. Cosette, in becoming a pupil at the convent, had to assume the dress of the schoolgirls. Jean Valjean succeeded in having the garments which she had laid aside given to him. It was the same morning suit he had carried for her to put on when she left the Thénardiers. It was not much worn. Jean Valjean rolled up these garments as well as the woolen stockings and shoes, which much camphor and the other aromatic substances of which there is a small valise, which he had managed to procure. He put this valise in a chair near his bed, and always kept the key of it in his pocket. "Father," Cosette one day asked him, "what is that box there that smells so good?" A very pleasant life began again for him. He worked every day in the garden, and was very useful there. He had formerly been a pruner, and now found it quite in his way to be a gardener. He knew all kinds of receipts and secrets of field work. These he turned into account. Nearly all the orchard trees were wild stock. He grafted them and made them bear excellent fruit. Cosette was allowed to come every day, and pass an hour with him, as the sisters were melancholy, and he was kind. The child compared him with them, and worshipped him. Every day at the hour appointed, she would hurry to the little building. When she entered the old place, she filled it with paradise. Jean Valjean basked in her presence, and felt his own happiness increase by reason of the happiness he conferred on Cosette. The delight we inspire in others has this enchanting peculiarity that, far from being diminished, like every other reflection, returns to us more radiant than ever. At the hours of recreation, Jean Valjean from a distance watched her playing and romping, and he would distinguish her laughter from the laughter of the rest. For now Cosette laughed. Even Cosette's countenance had in measure changed. The gloomy cast had disappeared. Laughter is sunshine. It chases winter from the human face. When the recreation was over and Cosette went in, Jean Valjean watched the windows of her schoolroom, and at night would rise from his bed and to take a look at the windows of the room in which she slept. God has his own ways. The convent contributed, like Cosette, to confirm and complete in Jean Valjean the work of the bishop. It cannot be denied that one of the virtue's phases ends in pride. Therein is a bridge built by the evil one. Jean Valjean was, perhaps without knowing it, near that very phase of virtue, and that very bridge when Providence flung him into the convent of the Petit Picpus. So long as he compared himself only with the bishop, he found himself unworthy, and remained humble. But for some time past he had been comparing himself with the rest of men, and pride was springing up in him. Who knows, he might have finished by going gradually back to hate. The convent stopped him in this descent. It was the second place of captivity he had seen. This house also was a prison, and bore dismal resemblance to the other from which he had fled, and yet he had never conceived anything like it. He once saw gratings, bolts, and bars of iron, to shut in whom? Angels? Those lofty walls which he had seen surrounding tigers, he now saw encircling lambs. It was a place of expiation, not of punishment, and yet it was still more austere and more sombre, and more pitiless than any other. These virgins were more harshly bent down than the convicts. A harsh, cold blast, the blast that froze in his youth, careened across that grated moat and manacled the vultures. But a wind still more biting and more cruel beat upon the dove-cage. And why? When he thought of these things, all that was in him gave way before this mystery of sublimity. In these meditations pride vanished. He reverted again and again to himself. He felt his own pitiful unworthiness and often wept. All that had occurred in this existence for the past 6 months led him back toward the holy injunctions of the bishop. Cosette through love, the convict through humility. Everything around him, this quiet garden, these balmy flowers, these children shouting with joy, these meek and simple women, the silent cloister gradually entered into all his being, and, little by little, his soul subsided into silence, like this cloister into fragrance, like these flowers into peace, like this garden into simplicity, like these women into joy, like these children. And then he reflected that 2 houses of God had received him in succession, that the 2 critical moments of his life, The first, when every door was closed and human society repelled him. The second, when human society again howled upon his track, and the galleys once more gaped for him, and that, had it not been for the first, he should have fallen back into crime, and had it not been for the second, into punishment. His whole heart melted in gratitude, and he loved more and more. Several years passed thus. Cosette was growing